We modern humans, Homo sapiens, have lived about 300,000 years. That sounds like forever until you realize our genus, Homo, first appeared 2.8 million years ago. For the vast chunk of our deep ancestral history, we weren't even in the picture. Others were running the whole human show long before us, and honestly, some of them held on far longer than we have so far. Homo erectus, for instance, lasted nearly 2 million years. 2 million years. Think about that. Perspective. All of recorded human history. Every single empire, every war, every single Renaissance masterpiece, every cringe tweet fits within the last 5,000 years. Homo erectus outlasted us by 400 times. They walked out of Africa, settled Asia, reached the Indonesian islands, mastered fire, and crafted highly advanced stone tools, and just kept pushing forward for an almost unbelievable stretch of time. Yet, they vanished. We did not. Why? Before we get to the why, though, we truly need to understand the who. See, most folks have a pretty poor idea of how many human species were actually walking around this planet at the exact same time. Through the 20th century, scientists thought human evolution was a straight line. One species turned into another, which turned into the next, in a linear path, just like a family tree that only ever grows a single branch. Neat, simple, and very convenient for textbook illustrations. But then we got much better at finding ancient bones, and then we learned to extract DNA from them. Ancient DNA science basically blew up over the last 15 years, giving us a way to read the genetic codes of people who died tens of thousands of years ago. Then suddenly, the whole picture shifted into something way messier, way more fascinating, and honestly, a little chaotic. At different times in the last 300,000 years alone, there were 5 or 6 different human species sharing this planet. You had Homo sapiens, that is us spreading out of Africa. Plus, there was Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, ruling over Europe and Western Asia with incredible success. Then came the Denisovans, a mysterious group we only know from a finger bone and some teeth in a Siberian cave, yet genetically distinct enough to be their own species. We had Homo floresiensis, tiny humans barely 1 meter tall, living on the Indonesian island of Flores, sometimes nicknamed the actual hobbits of the human family. Plus, Homo luzonensis, found in 2019 from fossils in the Philippines, which rewrote the timeline of ancient humans in Southeast Asia, and the Red Deer Cave people of southern China, who might represent another completely unique lineage that survived up until just 11,000 years ago. Let that sink in. Farming was already starting up, and early cities were growing across the Middle East, while humans were already keeping goats and planting wheat. And another human species was still out there in the hills of Yunnan province, living life, completely unaware they were about to become footnotes in our history books. Or maybe they were simply absorbed into the expanding populations of modern humans, until their bones became identical to ours, their memories forgotten. This was the world that existed before it vanished, a world with several different human species sharing it, a world that was, by any realistic standard, way more fascinating than the quiet one we have today. Let's talk about our Neanderthal cousins properly, because they deserve way more respect than they usually get. For decades, popular culture cast them as clumsy, brutish cave dwellers who were basically just waiting to be replaced by us, the clever Homo sapiens. Huge brows, tiny brains, terrible posture, no fashion sense. Basically, the evolutionary equivalent of that one coworker at your office who refuses to learn how to use the printer. But that image is dead wrong, and the scientific community has tried to correct it for decades with very little success, because Neanderthals were actually highly intelligent, and that does not sell like pictures of hunched, grunting cave dwellers. Let us look at the facts. Neanderthals actually had brains that, on average, were slightly larger than ours, not smaller. Larger. They crafted stone tools using an advanced technique called levallois knapping, which demanded planning several steps ahead. You cannot do it accidentally or by instinct. It demands real foresight and visualizing the finished result before you start. They controlled fire with real expertise. They hunted massive prey, like woolly mammoths, rhinos, cave bears, and bison, using smart group strategies that require communication and deep cooperation. They even buried their dead, sometimes in what seemed to be carefully arranged positions, leaving grave offerings nearby. Some burials may have included flowers, though this is still debated. Yet the reality of these intentional burials points to ritual. Ritual implies symbolic thought. Think about that. It shows a level of mental and emotional depth that should honestly make us think. They also made art. Cave art in Spain, at La Pasiga, at Ardales, and Maltravieso, has been dated back 65,000 years ago using uranium-thorium methods that completely bypassed the limits of carbon dating. 65,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had not even reached Europe yet, meaning those Neanderthals painted them. They also made personal jewelry out of eagle claws and shells. They mixed colorful pigments like ochre, manganese dioxide, maybe to paint their skin or their surroundings. They were doing things we only recently admitted were uniquely human traits. Neanderthals were actual people, not some dress rehearsal, but real people. Then, about 40,000 years ago, they vanished. That timing is no coincidence. It is almost exactly when modern humans started spreading into Europe in massive numbers. We show up, they disappear. That connection is hard to ignore, even if the exact reason is hotly debated. So, what actually happened? This is where researchers have clashed for decades, and where the real truth is probably much more messy and far more morally uncomfortable than a single tidy explanation. Theory number 1: we just outcompeted them, not by direct warfare, but through something more like sheer economic or ecological displacement. The thought is that Homo sapiens had major advantages in certain brain domains, especially in language, abstract thinking, and the power to build and keep up massive social networks that let us work on a massive scale Neanderthals could never match. While a Neanderthal group had 20 or 30 members, early Homo sapiens groups could network across hundreds, even thousands of people using shared symbols, stories, and trust. Trade networks bloomed, information flowed, and new tech spread faster. Picture being a Neanderthal hunting crew. You know your territory perfectly, and you are adapted to your freezing climate. You are physically tougher than those newcomers invading your valley, but they stay connected with folks 3 valleys away, who know even more people living farther out. When food migrates, they track it down using a massive network of shared gossip. When someone invents a sharper spearhead way down south, they get it within a generation. You only have your own tiny band's local wisdom. They are using the collective brainpower of a whole continent over thousands of years. That kind of network advantage compounds so quietly and so brutally. You never need to beat your rival in some epic showdown. You just have to be slightly better at surviving tough winters, finding food in bad years, beating local diseases, and just bouncing back after natural disasters. Keep doing that for generation after generation, and the math does the rest. No wars needed, no massive apocalypse, just the slow, quiet math of basic survival competition. Theory number 2 is much darker, forcing us to be brutally honest about what we are really like as a species. There is disturbing archaeological evidence out there of Neanderthal bones with cut marks showing they were butchered at Take Moulagerkia in France and Boit Cave in Belgium. Here, the evidence is pretty shocking. Neanderthal bones found there were purposely smashed open and hacked up in ways that clearly suggest a fleshing. Now, some experts view this as proof of complex burial rituals or desperate survival cannibalism among Neanderthals back then, but other prehistoric sites hint at brutal battles between different species. The hard truth is that Homo sapiens is rarely shy about hurting any group we see as different, scary, or just in our way. We did it 10,000 years ago, and again 1,000 years ago. We even did it last century with terrifying industrial efficiency. Could our ancient ancestors have actively hunted down, pushed out, or slaughtered Neanderthal tribes? It is not some wild, fringe theory. Top scientists take this very seriously. The debate isn't about whether clashes happened or not. They almost certainly did, at some point. The real question is whether conflict was the main cause of extinction, or just one dark piece of a bigger, messier puzzle. Most scholars today see a mix of things: competition, sudden violence, new diseases, loss of territory, and chaotic climate shifts all piling up. Over thousands of years, Neanderthals were likely already struggling with wild weather shifts before we showed up in droves. We didn't have to land a killer blow. We might have just been the final straw in a long line of problems their tiny, scattered populations simply couldn't handle. Then comes the plot twist that change everything. We also slept with them, not metaphorically, but literally. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals hooked up on multiple occasions, in different places, over tens of thousands of years. How so? Because their DNA lives inside us right now. If your roots lie outside Africa, about 1 to 4% of your DNA is actually Neanderthal. If you have ancestors from parts of Southeast Asia or Oceania, you probably also carry Denisovan DNA. In some communities in Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australia, that reaches 6%. Just let that actually sink in. We did not just meet these other human species from afar, exchange suspicious looks, and walk our separate ways. No. We built real relationships. We had kids with them. Those kids survived and reproduced, passing down a mixed heritage that lasted tens of thousands of years, and is still alive in billions of people alive today. That 10 you get in summer, part of that biology, actually traces right back to a Neanderthal gene. It was so useful for people moving up north that evolution kept it around. Same goes for your immunity. Specific parts of your HLA system, which helps your body spot and fight off sickness, carry Neanderthal traces. Also, populations living high up in Tibet carry, especially PAS1 gene, vital for breathing in thin mountain air, which came straight from the Denisovans. That ancient gene, still active and useful, is inside people who are alive today. This means the fate of other ancient humans is not just some simple story of replacement. It is a story of absorption, a messy, complicated process, but we merge anyway. Those other human species didn't just vanish into thin air. Actually, some of them, in a literal, biological way, became part of us. Let's talk about the Denisovans. Honestly, they might be the wildest and most humbling chapter in this whole evolutionary story. Yet, they are criminally left out of popular science shows, but we know they existed. We know they mingled with modern humans on at least 2 different occasions, across at least 2 different regions. We also know they lived on parts of the freezing Tibetan plateau. In fact, a jawbone found in Baishia Karst Cave in Tibet, at an altitude of 3,280 meters, shows they adapted to extreme mountain heights at a time when we aren't even sure if Homo sapiens could even survive up there. We also know from DNA evidence that they were spread across a massive chunk of Asia, stretching from Siberia through Southeast Asia and into the Pacific. What we do not know is pretty much everything else. See, our actual physical fossil record for these humans is just a single finger bone, some loose teeth, and that lonely jawbone from Tibet. That is it, an entire human species. Highly successful, widespread, and culturally advanced enough to mate with our ancestors and leave behind genetic traces in us today, is reduced in the archaeological record to a handful of bone fragments. We actually have more surviving physical proof of specific Roman senators than we have of this whole human lineage. And yet, thanks to ancient DNA technology, which is easily one of the most incredible scientific breakthroughs of the last 20 years, we can now tell they had dark skin, dark hair, and brown eyes. We also know they were much closer genetically to Neanderthals than they were to us. We know they were actually quite diverse within their own family tree to show serious genetic variation across populations, and we reconstructed all that from bone fragments that easily fit in the palm of your hand. It is almost heartbreakingly beautiful, isn't it? Deep in the mountains of Central Asia, and through Southeast Asian forests, along shores of islands that might not even exist today because of rising sea levels after the last ice age had ended, these Denisovan groups lived. They had fires, and likely some spoken language to communicate. They knew their home lands deeply, passed down over generations. They surely shared things like culture, traditions, and ancient stories. And then they completely vanished, leaving us in the dark for all of human history, with zero clue they had ever existed at all. We finally found them in 2010. from a bone some kid dropped in a cave 50,000 years ago. Homo floresiensis deserves a moment of our attention because those hobbit humans of Flores are one of the most truly baffling mysteries in all of human history, raising big questions that we still cannot fully answer today. First, found in 2003 in Leon Buel on this Indonesian island of Flores, these stood only 1.1 meters tall, about the height of a modern 6-year-old, with brains about the size of a grapefruit, by the standards of what we usually assume about brain size and intelligence. That's a remarkably tiny brain for a species capable of complex behavior. And yet, they crafted advanced stone tools that demanded real planning and skill. They hunted pygmy stegodons, miniature extinct elephants, which is definitely not easy prey you bring down by accident. They managed fire, and they had social structures complex enough to support knowledge across generations sharing. Their very existence was a direct challenge to what we call the cerebral Rubicon, the belief that a brain must reach a certain minimum size to handle truly human-level thinking. These hobbits said, actually, no. It is about how the brain is wired, not just its physical size, and that realization completely changed how scientists view smarts, human evolution, and the connection between anatomy and behavior. They held out on Flores until at least 50,000 years ago. Maybe even longer. The island geology is complicated. Some experts even argue for them surviving until 12,000 years ago. And then, just like everyone else, they vanished. Once again, the timing lines up with the rise of modern humans in the area. So, we return to the ultimate question. Why us? Why? Out of all these diverse species, some built for brutal climates we cannot even stand, some surviving for millions of years, some with brains as big or bigger than ours. Did Homo sapiens end up as the last human standing? Honestly, the truth is we do not know for sure, but our best theory points to a few connected factors, like language and symbolic thinking at a level no other creature ever reached. Not just talking. Every social animal shares information somehow, but the unique ability to build and share what we call agreed-upon fictions, abstract ideas, group identities built on shared stories, instead of direct personal connections. Rules, stories, and unseen rules that bind thousands of complete strangers into cooperative, functioning societies. The power to say, this land belongs to our people, and we will all protect it. Or, you broke our shared rules, so you must pay. Or, we owe each other because we share an ancestor none of us has ever met. That mindset lets us build societies at scales no chimpanzee group can ever manage on face-to-face trust alone. It is the secret engine behind tribal treaties, massive modern nations, and the global marketplace. It is a superpower that Homo sapiens mastered to a level no other species ever matched. Combine that with our incredibly unique talent for building on culture. How? Well, other human species use tool designs that stay exactly the same for hundreds of thousands of years. Even Neanderthal toolkits, as advanced as they were, evolved very slowly. But sapiens, our technology, went into overdrive in a completely different way. We did not just invent. We built on inventions. We constantly improved on older ideas, stacking progress across generations and different, faraway groups. Soon, progress started to speed up insanely fast, not slowly. Once you start that snowball effect, the perks pile up so fast that no rival group can ever catch up. Then, we have the sheer evolutionary habit of adapting to everything. Why? Because humans are generalists who can settle almost any habitat on Earth, while becoming specialized enough to truly thrive. Once we settled down, we ate anything. We dressed in animal furs to survive harsh climates we couldn't survive alone in. We built shelters, following our prey across entire continents. By then, the other species were starting to come under heavy stress from rapid climate shifts and habitat loss. Homo sapiens groups had already moved into almost every single livable habitat on the planet, and were setting up vicious cycles of growing populations, resource draining, and cultural exchanges that no rival back then could stop. There's a version of this tale that feels triumphant. Look at us. We survived despite some heavy odds, facing a chaotic climate, and rivalries with several other smart species, yet we survived. We're here. 7 billion of us, building cities, writing symphonies, and launching telescopes into orbit, and yes, arguing all over the internet about the exact way we might have factually helped wipe out our closest ancient evolutionary relatives. But there is another side to this story, and it's much harder to sit with. Every other human cousin has vanished, and in almost every single case, their disappearance aligns in timing and geography with our move into their territory. We probably didn't plan it. We almost certainly didn't coordinate some massive, intentional campaign. It happened slowly, over thousands of years, through subtle shifts that no person would have ever recognized as extinction in action. But the pattern is undeniable, and it's consistent, and it deserves an honest look. We are the most successful big-brained primate in the history of life on Earth. We're also, as far as we can reconstruct, linked to the loss of every close relative we ever met. That mix should stir up something, not just some simple, paralyzing guilt. Obviously, nobody alive today caused any of this, but still we need some recognition of who we are and what we've always been capable of. Honestly, how little we've changed over tens of thousands of years since our ancient ancestors watched the last Neanderthal campfires go cold, somewhere up in southern Europe's mountains. Today, being completely alone on Earth feels totally normal to us. It's all any living human has ever actually experienced. There are no Neanderthals at the train station. No Denisovans are saved in your contacts. Just think about sharing this big planet with another human species. Imagine another kind of people looking and acting a lot like us, even thinking like us. It feels like the setup for some fantasy novel. But for most of our evolutionary history, that was just Tuesday. Our ancestors walked a world filled with several different kinds of humans. They saw Neanderthal faces right across campfires and tense territorial borders. They regularly encountered Denisovans in the high passes of Central Asia. They might have watched Homo floresiensis from the tree lines of Indonesian islands, with absolutely no framework for understanding what they were even looking at because we barely comprehend it today. The existence of multiple species was just the normal way of life for most of our shared history. And then, we collapsed all that, however it happened. And for whatever mix of reasons, we ultimately ended it. We became the last ones standing. But the most incredible thing is that proof of these lost relatives did not vanish completely. It actually survived right inside the 1 to 4% of non-African genomes that traces directly back to Neanderthal ancestors and that Denisovan altitude gene. Genetic perks still helping Tibetan herders breathe up at 4,000 meters. Plus, those ancient immune system tweaks that likely helped our early ancestors survive deadly diseases they had never faced before. We still carry them unknowingly, completely hidden in every cell of our bodies. These extinct cousins are inside us, folded right into our biology, still quietly helping us survive even tens of thousands of years after the absolute last of their kind took their final breath. Why are we the only humans left standing? Maybe we were just slightly better at enough of the things that matter for long enough, generation after generation, and in enough harsh places to reach the final page of a story with so many characters. And honestly, some of those other players in the most literal sense imaginable never actually left.